The greatest leaders in business look for the emerging stories in their organization and use the data to choose their preferred outcome. What outcome do you want in your business? Listen to the stories of industry veterans, coaches, and consultants so you can choose your preferred business outcome. Hi, everyone. This is Vinay Raman again with the Business Blind Spots Exposed podcast. I am really excited with our new episode. I think you'll really enjoy the conversation I get to have with my guest today. Let me tell you about the BBSE, the Business Blind Spots Exposed podcast. It first started out with me. I could learn everything in the world. And over time, I realized how smart I was. I couldn't see everything. And that really started to bug me. And I started to find out that I have a number of blind spots, things I just can't see from where I'm standing. And as I started to ask more and more people who weren't me about what they knew, my gosh, those blind spots started to appear all over the place. I became stronger. I became more powerful. And now I like to brag about the fact I have 4,800 contacts in my phone. My phone can barely keep up with all the people that I have in it. And I've got those cadre of people that I just call and say, hey, I'm stuck. And 5 minutes, it's all cleared. This podcast is all about bringing the experts, the people who've been there, done that, the coaches, the consultants, the business veterans who've had those blind spots themselves so they can start to tell you about how they see the world. And maybe you can figure out what to Google so you now know how to figure out that blind spot yourself. So I'd encourage anybody who's listening in, please tell us where you're connecting from. Just say hello. Say hi. I think you will get a lot more out of this conversation just by chiming in and asking comments. It's completely live, and you can chime in on the comments panel towards your right-hand side. Let me do a little bit of housekeeping here before we get started so you don't have to listen to me the whole time. On the 9th of November, I've got Jerry Bolander. He's going to be talking about storytelling, how it leads to success inside and outside your company. I had a great conversation with Jerry, and gosh, it's so powerful how storytelling works. And if you start seeing the stories that emerge in your organization, you have so much more control as to where it goes. On October 25th, I've got Forum Brown. Forum is an incredibly passionate lady. I love what she stands for. The hidden company talent and how to find them. That's what she's going to be talking to us about. She spends a lot of time empowering women and women's causes, and in doing that has just built this keen eye for finding the diamonds in the rough. That's what you'll get from her. But today, I'm talking to Jodi Woelkerling. It's about the resilient organization. Why does it matter? Gosh, Jodi and I have talked a little bit, and I've learned so much even just in those short conversations. Let me tell you a little bit about who she is. Just a quick bio and background about her. So she runs a company called Jodi Woelkerling Enterprises. The industry is resilient culture and building the consultancy around coaching and training. And her business is all about this idea of assisting business to build an enduring resilient culture at the whole culture level, the various levels of leadership and within the business and at the individual level, kind of stratifying culture at all the different stages. Because it's not just here and it's not just here, it's all of it. And being so intentional about it is what I love about Jodi. So it's this whole idea that the business as a whole and the individuals within the business can experience the enormous benefits of this resilient culture. Jodi, first of all, hi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you so much for having me on, Vinay.
Absolutely. And did I summarize all that stuff in a anywhere close to reasonable fashion? I feel like I tried to distill a lot of what you've told me and get into simple words. I don't know that I'm so good at doing that.
You did a very good job, and you also pronounced my surname correctly, which is a rare thing. So well done.
Well, Jodi, I'd actually like to first start out and talk about, you just published a book. And I really would love to understand how people can think about world-class leadership in this book. Can you tell us a little bit more about that book that you just published?
Yep. So the book is written with the audience in mind of senior executives in a business. So like your CEOs and your CFOs, that sort of higher executive, and it is around what are some of the major cultural things that I see repeating coming up as issues within businesses. I've got a copy in front of me, so world-class leadership. But so basically it is designed for those senior leaders, and it's an awareness piece. So it's written in a way that the aim is that they read through a chapter that says a particular issue that comes up regularly, and they go, oh, I recognise that in my business, and to sort of illustrate it, there's case studies and that sort of stuff. So I always come from the point of view of awareness and understanding. Is you're halfway there to doing something about it. So it's an awareness piece. So then they can go, okay, this is a problem, and then look once they've finished the book about how to actually address the concerns.
It looks like our video has paused. Your audio is coming through fantastically, which I think is actually probably the most important part here. But I will make sure, even after this, that we'll get a copy of an image of the book and a link to the book as well, so that if anybody is interested, they can go and find it. But I wanted to take a quick moment here, again, just to encourage anybody who's listening in. Again, the name of the book is World-Class Leadership, and it's all about this idea of awareness and understanding. So please chime in if you have comments or questions. I'd love to see it. I'm sure Jodi could probably give you a lot more depth of response based on your questions. Jodi, awareness, understanding. I feel like that's the beginning or the foundational piece of everything, but it's so easy to get stuck in knowing what we know as opposed to investing in that awareness. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, absolutely. It has to be a conscious thing where you're actually always looking to find out more. And so whether that can be self-education or where that can be finding out more about what's going in your organization, absolutely. You can't assume that what you know is the full depth of what's out there, because that's never going to be the case. So if you assume you have blind sides, you're in a much better place to actually see them as they arise, and then obviously to be able to do something about them. If you assume you know everything, you're setting yourself up for a real trap.
So I want to push you on something that at least I'll say was kind of a big resistance from me a long time ago, and this idea if you're constantly questioning things, are you actually getting anywhere? Because if you're constantly inquisitive, you're constantly assuming that there's more for me to know, as opposed to assuming I know something. Don't you just get stuck at some point in time if you're constantly just inquire, and just asking questions all the time?
It's probably a really good point. You've got to have a balance. If you're constantly asking questions and don't actually do anything about that, of course, yes, you're going to get stuck. So it's a balance of ask questions, investigate, and then take steps. And then once you've taken steps, look at what you've actually done, adjust, and then, so it's an ongoing process. So you're looking at it, you're taking steps, then you're reassessing, then you're taking steps again. It's a constant process. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Just assessing on its own is not enough.
Something I don't know if this you really call this a hobby, but I think I've heard some other people talk about it like this. Fourth dimensional or quantum level physics is something, I don't know, that just completely intrigues me. I've met a number of people, some really interesting scientists who work at the Large Hadron Collider, as well as a number of other physicists. And one of the things that I've learned from them is this idea that there are very few absolutes in life or in quantum physics. There's very few 0% and 100%. Most everything is a probability. And I think that's a little bit of what I'm hearing here, right? If in this higher level of reasoning, in this higher level of existence that is the world, the universe, physics, right? There's no 100%. It's not just all inquiry. It's not all just I know. It's 71% inquiry and 29% I know. Is that a fair way to lay that out?
Yeah, I don't know about the percentage, but I would absolutely agree with you. Yeah, absolutely agree with you. And it's interesting, you've hit on a interest of mine as well when you're talking about quantum physics. The whole idea that things change based on the observer and that sort of stuff. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, my friend of mine and I both published an article in a project management magazine about this idea of we just use the hero's journey as this cycle. First you don't know about what's going to happen, then you get this awareness, then this engagement, and this ownership, and you kind of keep going through this. And depending where you are, I mean, when you're first discovering something, there's a lot of questions to be asked. But as you get a little further along in the cycle and you start to have asked all the right questions, then you can start to invest more in I've got some confidence in what I know now. It is now to stop time. I can stop asking as many questions and start asserting what I know. Is that in alignment with the way you think about things as well?
I probably haven't thought it out to the same extent as that, but what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
Hmm. So
Hmm.
tell me more about the book. It says 10. I mean, there's 10 principles or 10 kind of tenets. Walk me through a little bit of what that's all about.
Yep. So basically, through my experience, what do I see as the main things that cause large scale cultural issues in businesses? So, for example, one of the chapters is around leaders not having an accurate picture of the well-being of their staff, which is a common thing that happens. So it's as I said, it's designed that a manager will read that and go, that actually, because it's got case studies and that sort of stuff, they can see themselves or their organisation in the explanation. So then it's no longer a blind spot, and it's something then that they can adjust. So yeah, the 10 of the main patterns that I see. So things like that even though we want to create a environment, so this is another one of the chapters, we want to create an environment where people feel that it's safe to sort of view their ideas. We find that generally people don't, and they'll protect themselves, which is often referred to as psychological safety. So there's a chapter around that. So yeah, 10
Well, so that's.
different areas.
I'm sorry.
I said just, yeah, 10 different areas.
So the whole idea of psychological safety, gosh, that resonates so much. I mean, if you look at Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, which I think has become a very popular way of looking at the world, right? That safety and security, if you don't have it, you really can't do anything else. If you're worried about people breaking into your house every day, you're not thinking about saving for the future at that point.
Yeah,
Right?
so absolutely. So if you take that to an organisational perspective, if you're worried about your security in terms of if you voice an opinion, it's going to come back badly on you. If you try something new, it's going to come back badly on you, that sort of stuff. Basically, what that encourages is a behaviour from your staff where they're protecting themselves. Like as you said, so they'll do things like keep ideas to themselves, or they won't try new things, learn outside of what their current reference is, not help other people as much because they think it may come back on them. So yeah, and it's a buzzword at the moment, but my gosh, it's extremely important.
So I relate this to myself as a story. I mean, I didn't really realize this until I was talking to someone about this recently. Is that in all the years that I work for, it's been a long time since I've worked for someone else. I've been running companies for some time now, but I'll probably say the first 15 years of my career, 10, 15 years of my career, as I was working for others, I used to go to work every day worried that I was going to get fired. Now, let me give you some statistics. I've never gotten below a 94 out of 100 on my performance rating. So I get a 94 out of 100, which I think is a pretty solid score in all of those years. But yet every day I was worried about doing something where I would get fired just because of the environments that I was in. I shouldn't open my mouth. I should just shut up and just kind of keep my head down so that I didn't get noticed. Well, think about I like to think about how many times I could have actually been moving the organization forward. Instead of moving it forward, I was actually just protecting, and as opposed to moving. And they were losing all that time that I was thinking about protecting as opposed to innovating or growing. Is that
Yeah.
about the way you see the things as well?
100%, 100%. So if you think of that from an organizational perspective, what are those managers missing out from, not just you, but any other staff who feel the same way, in terms of collaboration, innovation, general productivity, because as you said, we were at sort of around 94% performance, but for a lot of staff, it actually means their productivity goes down because they're covering their tracks or protecting themselves a lot of the time rather than being productive. So absolutely. So my question with that is, okay, is that a cultural wide things, or is that something that's particular to you? And what are the implications of that, and what can we do about that?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I suspect there's probably a lot to do with me. Is probably the true answer. Um, so I want to stop for a moment. I would love to ask anybody who's listening in live or even afterwards. I'd love to hear from you if you have ever been in a situation, have worked in an environment where you didn't feel like there was that psychological safety, and perhaps even did it hold you back. I'd be kind of curious. Just type in a yes if you have, or no if you haven't. Um, I brought you in today to talk about this idea of the resilient organization. We started off a little bit with your book. Talk to me about what is a resilient organization? What does resilience mean to you?
Yep. So resilience, if we look at it from a personal point of view to start with, and then apply it to an organisation. So I look at it as, from an individual point of view, staying in that calm state as much as possible. So we all have stresses in our life. As much as possible, staying in that calm state. And staying in that calm state means that you can operate more from clearer thought and from a more responding rather than reacting point of view. But then there are always, because we're human, there are always going to be times when our stress levels are challenged. So things happen. Recognizing that in ourselves and bringing ourselves back to calm as quickly as possible. And there's lots of things that you can do to sort of help develop that skill in yourself. And the third side is, sometimes there are just things that just have a succession of things that go wrong, and things that really challenge us. So if we take, from a personal point of view, an example for a lot that most people could relate to is just say something like a marriage breakup. It means that there's a lot of things that are stressing yourself in that point of view, because there's financial, there's kids, there's housing, there's a whole heap of things. So most people will feel stressed through that process, but being able to, as much as possible, almost see a light at the end of the tunnel and work through all those challenges up to the other side. So that's from an individual point of view. Swap that to an organisational point of view. So the first one, staying calm as much as possible. That's the leaders staying calm as much as possible and staying in like a strategic, clear thought point of view. The second part of the explanation, when you are feeling stressed, recognising it, bring yourself back to calm as quickly as possible. Swap that to an organisation. Basically, there are going to be things that challenge you. So just say we've had 18 months of it with the pandemic. There have been things that have challenged organisations in ways that they've never been challenged before. Again, recognising that and adjusting to it and doing things to basically have the organisation a greater chance of either surviving, but also ideally thriving in that changing situation. And the third side is as I said, which is basically, there are things that are going to stress you. Again, the pandemic's a really good example. There are some organisations, so you take somebody in, just say the hospitality industry, huge amount of pressure and stress on them through this period, a lot of disruption, a lot of unknown circumstances and that sort of stuff. Being able to deal with that and to see a light at the end of the tunnel coming out of that. So I hope that explains it. But yeah, I start with the individual, and then it pretty much the same concepts equate through to an organizational level.
So I'm gonna distill this into my own words just to make sure I understood this properly, and that is, it's this ability to kind of come back to a centered, or maybe what I call a grounded state, right? And I think the distinction that pops up in my mind when I hear that is I've heard many people saying, I can't wait to get back to normal. And every time I hear that, I kind of twitch a little bit or wince it when I hear that, because I don't know that there's ever been a normal. Normal continues to change. So, I mean, you can call it what is your normal, but it's really more of a grounded state where you're standing comfortably on your 2 feet as an individual, as an organization. So normal will continue to move, but are you grounded in that normal state, in that calm, restful state where you're saying, I'm comfortable right here. I'm ready to kind of keep taking the next step. Did I get that right?
Yes, I think that's a really good way of explaining it, about being grounded and being able to adjust and look at things from a state of rational and grounded process. I mean, you're absolutely right saying that there's always been change and there's always been challenges. And you just need to look at something like an organisation like Blockbuster. So they were in a rapidly changing industry, didn't spot it, and pretty much went out of business because of it. So you're absolutely right. There's always been change and there's always developments going on. It's about organisations really adjusting to that as much as possible.
Someone told me a fantastic story, which I really liked. I talked to him about this idea of I'll be the first to admit, I'll raise my hand first. My ego has gotten in the way many times, thinking I know something when in fact there was lots of questions. That's why I started a podcast around it. We were talking about this idea of, he's gone into business owners. He's gone into business owners and talked to them about how things are happening with the company, how they're developing. And one business owner said to him one time, we haven't changed things in 20 years. So he looks at the business owner and said, so you're driving the same pickup truck that you were driving 20 years ago? And the guy kind of just stopped for a moment. He said, huh. And the guy said, yeah, if you're answering that question, something's changed, hasn't it? How many things have changed in your life outside of just that pickup truck? Or whatever method of conveyance you get to work, or how you start your day, or how many children you have, or your in-laws living with you, whatever the case may be. Things continue to change as much as you don't think as much as you like to keep things in a stasis, in a comfortable state, they're changing every single day. And being able to embrace those changes so that you can maximize your ability to grow in those situations, I think is what you're talking about. Is that right?
Absolutely. 100%. You're correct. We have to, as business owners, constantly adjust. And as you mentioned, things like personal stuff as well, we have to adjust it personally as well, because nothing ever stays the same. There's always things that are changing out there.
But all right, so we've kind of talked about these two sides here. We've talked about the individual and we've talked about the organization, right? How do you consciously and systematically build resilience? I mean, I would be surprised if there are a number of people kind of listening to this today or in the future who say, yeah, so how do you do that? Right? What are the steps to building conscious and systematic resilience?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So from an individual point of view, it really is looking at yourself very carefully and working out ways. I always look at resilience personally on 3 levels. And the first one is, okay, when I'm feeling stressed, how can I bring myself back to calm? And there's ways of doing that. The second level is things that I can do in my life, whether they're lifestyle things, whether they're mindset things, to keep myself in that calm state as much as possible. And the third level is I'm not sure if you guys use the term the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
Yep. I don't know what sayings are Aussie-isms and so looking at the nitty-gritty of what are the things that actually are patterns in your life that cause you problems. So it's often those subconscious things, again, the blind sides, the things that you're not aware of. So that's from a personal point of view, and people actually working through that. You can do a certain amount yourself, but having that inquiring mind and always wanting to learn really does make a difference. And with a lot of people, I find, especially for the subconscious things, coaching is an incredibly incredibly useful, and you can get amazing results with coaching, having a resilience expert actually helping you work through your challenges in that area. So that's all the individual. Compare that to an organisation. From an organisational point of view, to me, it's more about patterns and overarching concepts. So when you have, just say you have a stressed employee in your business, as a leader, how do you know that that's something with that individual person, and that individual person needs support? Or how do you know if that's something that's part of the environment? Well, a lot of the time is looking at those patterns, looking at overarching concepts, looking at patterns, looking at things that are commonplace. So if you take the example you said before about you're at 94% performance, but you're worried if you're going to lose your job. Well, my first question, which I said before, is that just you? So is it something that's particular to you, or is that something that every second employee feels? So that is the key thing of working out, is this individual, is this organisational, and things like the statistics that you use are a really good way of doing that. Is this something that there's a pattern through the organisation?
Yeah.
Or the department?
It's interesting. I was listening to someone, and they talked about this idea of being inquisitive and asking questions. And the first two questions they ask, and kind of going through this process, is whenever you think something, and it takes some time to develop this. At least for myself, it's taken this a long time to develop this habit, where when I see something, the first thing I ask myself, is that true? Right. Well, I've been doing it for the last 20 years, so it's got to be true. Then I've got to ask myself, is that absolutely true? As in, is there a 1% chance that there's any other option available that I'm not aware of? That's usually where I kind of go, well, yeah, there might be another opportunity. There's something to be inquired about at that point. There's a question to be asked. What is that other thing? Because that is that blind spot, that one little percent that you hadn't previously acknowledged. And I think that's what I'm hearing is, but as an organization, starting to find out what are the patterns that are occurring and what are those overarching concepts or behaviors that continue to happen in your organization, or where you can find those blind spots and those, what I'll call the unlocks to the next stage. How does that sit with you?
Absolutely. 100%. I think you've summarized that very well.
Well, I'm starting to ask myself a lot of questions. So tell me more. As an organization, we want to build organizational resilience. What are the kind of the first? I always, whenever I go to a company and work with them, I always try to establish a baseline of where they are. Is that the same approach that you take in working with an organization to build that resilience? What does that pathway look like for you?
Absolutely. So the first step is always work out where they're at. So exactly what you said. And I always say that you use a couple of different ways to actually establish that. And some of them are quantitative, so measured things, and some of them are qualitative. So things like the quantitative are things like, what are some of those key stats in the business that most businesses are aware of? So things like performance rates, staff turnover, that sort of stuff that most businesses do have statistics that they may not analyse, but they know, or they can find out fairly quickly. The quantitative, you can also do things like engagement surveys. They're useful. What I say to people is never take them as 100% and never take them as the only way of measure. So I'd be interested to hear how you approach in terms of the quantitative side. So that's the quantitative, but I think there is a lot of benefit in qualitative measures for finding a baseline. So that's things like observations. Watching teams and looking at things like, what's their process? How do they interact with each other? What's the general, to sound very non-quantitative with this, things like, what's the vibe? What's that general feel? And most people, even if they're not somebody who feels energy, most people, if they walk into a room where there's just been an argument, they can feel that there's just been an argument. So that's what I mean by the vibe. So what's the general sentiment and the way people actually feel and how they interact? Are they enthusiastic? That sort of stuff. So observations are really useful. A little bit hard when people are working from home. You can still get it to a certain extent over Zooms and that sort of stuff. The other side of qualitative is really sitting down with people through the organisation. So not just your senior leaders, people throughout the organisation have those one-on-one, or in some cases group conversations that are very much designed to find out what are the patterns and actually really build that rapport with that person so they trust to actually say what they really think. So I always say with businesses, 100% agree with you, you need to find a baseline, but I'm not somebody who says just use statistics and quantitative. The qualitative has an enormous value as well.
Gosh, yeah, that's there's a lot to unpack just within that. I'll talk about myself personally. Growing up as a kid, I grew up in an environment where there was some spiritual threads running within the company. I mean, within the not the company, within the family, as I suspect there are in many families across the world. But then there's also I come from a long line of engineers, so everything is all about nice, neat boxes, and hey, 1+1 always equals 2. And I've always had sort of this dichotomy within me, right? Which one is right? And I think that was the wrong question. Kind of going back to the whole, how often do you ask questions? It's not 100%, it's not 0, it's a mix, right? Neither one is wrong, neither one is right. And it's about this idea of looking at the quantitative components and understanding that with the context of the qualitative components. Great, people are making lots of revenue. Super, but are they happy? Because they can make lots of revenue, but if they're unhappy, they're leaving, which means you'll make no revenue. But if they're making lots of revenue for you and they're happy in their roles, why would they leave? That's a fuller picture and a fuller story. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And things like if you talk about staff retention, it's generally about them being happy. Yes, things like people think it's money a lot of the time. Yes, that's a factor. Everybody needs to pay the bills and keep a roof over their head, but it's nowhere near the main factor. You're absolutely correct. If they're performing well, but they're not happy, chances are in a year or two, they're not going to be there.
Yeah, I work with a lot of staff remotely across the globe just because, for time zone purposes, for cost purposes, talent acquisition purposes, it just makes my life a lot easier in lots of dimensions and more difficult sometimes too. And the fact that I'll never touch them in person, I'll never be able to give them a high five, never be able to take them out for a beer, means it's all the more important for me to invest in their livelihood and make it super important so that, because look, they can go find a job somewhere else, but they don't want to leave because they like working with me too much, and they get fulfilled by what they're doing. And that gives me some comfort. I can actually go to sleep at night because of that. Otherwise, I probably would not, because I would be worried people are leaving me every single day.
And the fact that that's the case is a good reflection on you as a leader, and is something that probably a lot of leaders could learn from in this environment, because a lot of leaders have gone from seeing their employees regularly or being able to get out of their desk and walk towards them to a remote situation. And that's a different skill for leaders to be able to engage in that remote situation. So that's a good reflection on you as a leader.
Well, I actually wanted to give us an opportunity to talk through maybe a situation, right? I would love to get your perspective on it if you'd be so inclined. And what I'd like to do is maybe just share a screen here for a second. Maybe let's talk through a situation. I'd love for you to kind of, I'll set the stage here, if you will, and love for you to kind of dissect it and kind of tell me what you hear is happening. Because as much theory as I was taught in high school, it didn't really sink in until I got to touch the practical application of how to do it. Then it started to make sense to me. So let me share a screen here, and then we'll see if we can go from there. So I've got this idea. Can you see what I have on screen here?
Yes, meet Chris.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different profiles here. We created one, and it's just this idea that Chris is this eager employee. She's been a technician in your company for 6 months. It can be any type of role, right? We just picked a technician. She is doing very solidly in terms of her production or revenue per hour. She drives a company vehicle, so she is a safe accelerator. She's not dangerous, but she doesn't get as many stops with customers. And I feel like this could be a everyday sort of occurrence as an employee, someone who's doing well on one regard, but has got some areas of, I wouldn't say concern, but areas to kind of pull up their socks a bit more, if you will. Um does that sound like a run of the mill kind of situation for you too?
Common situation, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go to this next page and we're going to take a look at how this actually stacks up. I would love to understand what you think of this. So the idea in this graph here, and this is what we've done is as a company, we've taken this and we've charted this out against what is the what I'll call the gold standard. And there's a green line that you can kind of see here, sort of somewhat faintly. That is what really highly effective employees are doing. And you can see that Chris doesn't meet a highly effective employee in all regards. She meets some of them. She's getting close. The blue area is Chris, and the red area in the middle is a low performer. What do you see here as a leader or as an organization? And talk to me in terms of resilience. How do you receive this? What do you hear is happening for Chris and maybe for the leadership and maybe even the organization? I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, so this is a really good example of the data is a great starting point to work out what's going on. But so that's the quantitative. So before I was talking about in terms of organisation-wide, you can use the same concept here with an individual. So this is the quantitative. So the qualitative, I would want to sit down as a leader or as a consultant and find out more. So that's find out more about her job and the demands of her job, but also where she's at personally. So what are the things that help her perform well? What are the things that stop her performing well? How motivated is she? It says in here that she's fairly keen, but actually find that out about her and what actually gives her motivation. Is it positive feedback? Is it making sure there aren't things that stop her being able to perform well? Because organisations have an amazing ability to put things in place that actually are almost like stops to actually high performance. And really sit down and find out more about her, what's important, and really build that trust. So as I said, you could do that as her leader, and it's something that's of huge value for leaders to do. But as a consultant, I would be doing the same thing. Find out more about what's actually going on with her. What is this actual stops made? What does that actually mean? And why is it an issue for her? What's actually causing that?
So I'm actually going to stop sharing because I'd love to see you, not this picture.
Even though I'm still frozen.
Yeah, it's still better than the image itself.
It'd be nice if I froze with a smile on my face, but anyway.
So, as an organization, you get some of this data that tells you what's actually happening. I mean, you talked about this idea of where are you, what is. You get a graphic that kind of tells you a little bit about this one particular individual, and maybe even all the individuals in your company. It starts to give you an opportunity to shift what you're believing is actually happening in your company. Because what I found is I love racing cars and going faster on a racetrack as I start to go. Lap 1, I'm warming up. Lap 2, I'm going even faster. Lap 3, I'm usually at full speed, is where I'd like to be. Where I turn in lap 3 and where I turn in lap 1 are different because I'm operating in a different state. As I start going faster, I've got to adjust again and again. And I think I'm hearing a little bit of that in what you're saying. Being able to see some of this information gives you an opportunity to start to adjust your thinking, your beliefs. Am I saying that right?
Absolutely. Thinking, beliefs, and behaviour, and how you manage that employee or manage the team at large. If it's something that we talk about patterns for is this a common thing that is through a large percentage of people in the team, or is it something that just related to her? So yeah, it gives you a chance to find out more so you can adjust accordingly.
Now, why do people struggle with this? I mean, let's just assume that everybody who's listening in again today or in the future are kind of just nodding their head, saying, "Yep, super resilient organization. That's what I want to do. That's what I'm interested in doing. I'm gung ho. I'm ready to go do it." Where do they get stuck? Why do they get stuck?
Oh, that's a huge question, Vito. That's a huge question. Can be all sorts of reasons. Like you mentioned one in terms of assumptions,
Okay.
making assumptions about things. The whole not really realizing something's a problem. So we've done it this way for whatever period of time and not thinking that there might be a better way. Unfortunately, with a lot of leaders, we're all human. So things like our own insecurities or our own ego-based things, whether they're kind of fear or whatever, can come into it as well. And I always say to people, people leadership is one of the trickiest things to do as a leader, to effectively manage your people. And my personal theory is, for the majority of people, it's not an innate skill. There are very few people who start out life as natural born leaders. It's normally something that gets developed. I think you and I were mentioning this before we turned the camera on. It's something that gets developed over time generally with a lot of mistakes and with a lot of adjusting. So one, it takes somebody who's really got that self-analysis and self-adjustment to be able to do that effectively. And it takes time, and it takes that conscious effort to actually develop. And I think in most organizations, leadership development is not done anywhere near as well as it needs to be. And I think really focusing on leadership development can make an enormous difference in the organization. So what I mean by that, with leaders, people, they realize that leadership is it's something that needs to get developed. So they'll do things like send people on leadership training programs. Fantastic, great start. But that then needs to be followed on. So things like mentoring programs, coaching, leadership coaching, having resources available for constant development, that sort of stuff. And I think, very long-winded way of answering your question, there's a lot of ways that things can go wrong, but one of the absolute keys that I think, and this doesn't apply to all organizations, but a lot of organizations, they need to do leadership development more consciously and more proactively.
So I think one thing so this is one of the things I've started to do is, a lot of the things that I like to believe have sort of foundational require investigation. Define for me what the word leader means. I have a definition myself, and I'd love to compare it to yours, but I'd love for you to go first.
It's really interesting. It's that whole, if you talk in terms of organization, what's a manager versus a leader? So you can have, and Simon Sinek's talked about this, is people who don't have manager title, but they're leaders. So they're people who set the tone, set the direction, support others, and set. I talked about vibe before. Set a vibe towards what's going on. Now, a lot of the time, there are also people who have the manager title, but they can be somebody who, just say, if you talk a factory environment, can be somebody on the floor who is constantly looking to develop and support other staff members. That person mightn't have the title, but they're a leader within that team. I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
Well, I think no. I think you have. Just in the sense that I think there's lots of definitions for leader. I'll tell you mine, and that is I've generally shifted over time to believe that there's a genius in every individual, and I've stopped thinking I'm the genius, so I started thinking everybody else has genius as well. It is really whether I'm smart enough to understand it. Because if there's a genius, there's value that they create. How much value? Is it one person? They create value for one person or 7.7 billion? That's a different story, right? But if everybody has the ability to create value because of their own genius, that is leadership, because that is value that you're actually able to add. Right? Now, if you're starting at a company for the first time and there's a company of 50,000 employees and you're the newest recruit, are you going to be adding the most value to the organization? Possibly not. Likely not, because you're just getting to know the organization. But over time, as you start to understand more and more about the organization and you've had your share of failures and what to do and what not to do, and if someone takes the time to encourage you to develop your own self-worth, that value creation will come and naturally amplify itself. I believe that is leadership, and I think it's at an individual level. And your statement about being able to develop leadership within companies is a severely lacking area. I agree 100% with that. How does that resonate with your definition?
It's interesting. I really do like your take on that. That there is a genius, and it's a really good point to, like, almost to make an assumption to come from, that everybody has their genius. The other one that I say is that everybody's trying to do their best.
Yeah.
It's the other assumption that is extremely useful, because especially when there's challenging behaviours or not ideal circumstances. Okay, if you come from the assumption everybody's trying to do their best and everybody has an internal genius, that is a preface from which you can work out, okay, what's stopping them stepping into that genius, or what's stopping them or creating an environment where their behaviour is not as ideal as it could be. So it's a very different take on it. So I love that you do that. I've not heard that inner genius one before, but I think you're absolutely correct.
Well, I mean, if we go back, thank you. If we go back to that example of Chris that we shared just a number of moments ago, if she was in fact someone who had come to the company 6 months ago and is already starting to produce very highly on the production side, creating lots of revenue, gosh, there's just some innate talents that she has. Not everybody has. I can't imagine everybody just steps up to the plate like that and starts knocking a home run, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or bats a century, which is probably something that Aussies might more appreciate, right? So not everybody just comes up to the plate and just starts to do that, right? So if you could start to understand that and culture and coach that innate capability, gosh, sort of the world is her oyster, and she works for you. I mean, what a fantastic place to be. Is the way I see it. Is that that resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. And approaching it that way with that. So take Chris as an example. If you then tap into, if she's an eager employee and you tap into the things that are actually going to allow her to become, because there's that area that, of all the areas, there's that one area that she's not as well on. Tap into her ability with that. You're going to end up with a productive, eager employee who's likely to stay with you over the long term. So 100%. See that inner genius, see that inner desire to actually do the right thing and perform well, because most people want to perform well in their job. There's usually something along the way that jades them or prevents them in some way from not performing well. Yeah. So yeah, it's a fantastic assumption to come from.
Jodi, I like stories. I've always loved stories ever since I was a little kid. Still love stories. I feel like I've read lots of books about management principles, things like that. And I got to tell you, at some point in time, I'm probably going to get crucified for even saying something like this, but I feel like some of them start to say the same thing over and over again. But a good story will still continue to captivate me no matter what. I will tell you, I'm partial to like spy, espionage thrillers, political thrillers. So I'd love for you to tell me a story. Tell me a story about building a resilient organization. Tell me about where it started and kind of the middle and the end, the journey that they went through.
So my journey.
Mm-hmm. Yourself, or maybe even a customer. I mean, please abstract out what you need to. But I'd love to hear a story of how it kind of started, how it went, and where it ended in terms of building of that resilient organization.
Yeah, so I'll explain in terms of my journey. My focus on resilience very much came out of my own challenges, which you talk about the hero's journey, and not saying I'm a hero, but that they talk about in terms of stories, they call it the hero's journey. I was somebody who was very seriously affected by stress for most of my working life. And a few years back, I was in a pretty bad way. I was having physical symptoms. I wasn't performing the way that I wanted to. I wasn't really feeling great in terms of myself, and it was starting to affect relationships and that sort of stuff. And I had one of those epiphany moments where I went, there has to be something better than this. And it started an obsession in me. So that's an obsession around my dealing with my own stress and putting things in my life that kept that in a good way. And then that morphed into actually helping others through coaching, which morphed into leadership, which morphed into the organization. So you talk about the hero's journey. Because I've spent most of my working life in corporate, it then became very obvious to me, okay, yes, I had things within myself I needed to work on, but there were also organizational things there that could have been done better through various organizations. So that whole progression and that story meant that to me it was an obvious step along the way to actually go, okay, so yes, you want to help the individual and build stress resilience in the individual, but there are also organizational patterns and things that put stresses and strains on people that don't need to. They can culturally be addressed. So that's kind of my story, and I just find it's something that's fairly common in just about any organization. And the larger the organization, the harder it is to actually, one, have a concept of this. What are the things that create stress for our staff, and to actually be able to turn it around. So it's a very rewarding thing to be involved in, of actually helping organizations, because again, most leaders want to actually do well. They want to come from looking after their staff, that sort of stuff. So help them along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, from a personal point of view, I've told my wife, as I've realized some of my shortcomings along the way, she has kindly she's kindly smiled sometimes. She's too good to me sometimes. And she's kindly smiled to me and she said, yeah, but the damaged, mottled, bruised, banged up version of you is what makes you so perfect for me. Right? And the point being that I couldn't have gotten to be the person that I was unless I had gone through all that hardship that was there for a reason. And a lot of people say, oh gosh, I've had a list of failures. I learned from someone else a quote. They say, no longer is there winning or losing. There's only winning and learning. You have to
Absolutely.
learn in order to get there. There's no such thing as losing. Every time you lose, it is actually an opportunity to learn how to do better.
100% agree. It's often our biggest challenges or our biggest setbacks that are our greatest learning points.
Yeah. If there were three things that you could tell someone, kind of as to walk away from this, and they wanted to, jot down for themselves, these are the three things I want to focus on. What do you think those nuggets would be that someone should write down for themselves to start to think about being more resilient themselves and as an organization?
Yep. So if you talk of it in terms of a leader of an organization, I would say start with finding out where you're at. So the qualitative and quantitative assessment that we talked about before, find out where you're at, make steps to address it, and then adjust and reassess as you go along. So that's from an organizational point of view. From an individual point of view, be constantly learning and working on yourself. develop your self-awareness and your own awareness of your own challenges and your own setbacks, and have that sort of inquiring and ever developing mind in order to make a better version of yourself tomorrow than you were today. Third one. So I'll talk about leaders. So we talked about organisation, individuals. So talk about leaders. So leaders wanting to become better leaders. I would say work on your emotional intelligence. And we haven't covered that in this conversation, but to me, emotional intelligence is an absolute key part of being a good leader. So there's two sides to emotional intelligence. The first side is self-awareness and self-development. It's the side that people don't really hear about as much. So it's being really aware in yourself and really developing yourself. And the other side of it is developing your skills in terms of connecting with and really developing strong relationships and empathizing with the people around you.
I should send you a article that a friend and I wrote named Tracy Phillips. She and I wrote about this idea of IQ, EQ, and we thought of this third thing called PQ, percipience quotients, your ability to perceive yourself. And all of these elements of what you're talking about, the awareness of self, becoming better, and being able to work on yourself and your perception of yourself, and eliminate those self-limiting beliefs. I'll send that to you. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. We're just about to release another article in a magazine around that topic.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating to read it.
Yeah, it would. I think it's a missing piece in that link. Those three together, I think, make a stable stool, if you will. And I think the piece that I heard is that awareness of self is, most people, when they think of Superman, they think of, Man of Steel can do anything, but he also knows that kryptonite is his weakness, right? You could not be Superman without understanding that you have kryptonite. I mean, if he walked into situations where kryptonite is vastly or just ubiquitous, right? It's all over the place. He would be ineffective, to say the least. It would kill him. So being able to know that there are situations that when you walk in, you're going to be ineffective. Gosh, that's just as powerful as knowing where you are incredibly effective. And I think that's a little bit of what I just heard from you.
Yep, 100% agree.
We've gone through and done a full survey of what I think is how to think about resilience in an organization. Jodi, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they have further questions, want to understand, find your book, or just get in touch with you?
Yep. So the best thing is to go onto my website, which is just jodiwoelkerling.com. So if you have a look in the show notes, you'll see the spelling of my name. So jodiwoelkerling.com, and there's information about what I do. There's also a spot where they can find out more about the book. There's also spots in there where they can register interest for to find out more, or to have a chat and an assessment to take it further. So that's the best place.
Great. Well, if anyone does have any questions for Jodi or would like me to connect you to Jodi, I'd be more than happy to do that. Just feel free to reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. You can find me, Vinaya Raman, on LinkedIn. I think, Jodi, I've actually connected with you on LinkedIn as well, so I can connect you there as well. I encourage you to reach out to Jodi. The Becoming a Resilient Organization has a number of benefits that might even make your life better on many different dimensions. So thank you, Jodi. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. And again, Jodi, I really appreciate you spending some time with me.
Thank you so much for having me on, Vinay.
Yeah.